Trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. Here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show. Today on The Beacon Show, we welcome my new friend, Eric, the executive director of New Hope Ministries, whose journey as a young boy in a Christian home to leading one of Pennsylvania's most impactful human services organizations truly demonstrates the power of faithful stewardship. Started in a church basement 42 years ago, New Hope Ministries now serves nearly 25,000 people across 9 locations under Eric's leadership. Now, in this interview, you're going to hear raw honesty and practical wisdom, while Eric shares his early experiences in child welfare and how it shaped his approach to nonprofit management. Now, Eric believes, as I do, that operating with excellence is crucial for sustaining kingdom impact. So whether you're leading a nonprofit, a ministry, or a business, in this interview, you're going to gain valuable insights on building strong relationships, securing resources, and measuring impact while keeping Christ at the center. Enjoy. Eric, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. I'm so honored that you've taken the time to be here with us today. Looking forward to this conversation. Just thank you. Thank you for your heart for people, for your desire to see some of the challenges that we see in this world be eradicated. This is going to be a great conversation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah. Well, Eric, as I was sharing with you before we officially hit the record button, it's always interesting to me to learn about our guests and how they grew up as a child, what their life was like, and kind of maybe a little bit of what you wanted to be, what you grew up. Talk to us about little Eric.
Well, little Eric was the first grandchild on both sides of my family, and I was cherished as a little boy. I had lots of aunts and uncles and grandparents who were just pouring into me in a part of my life, and I grew up just feeling incredibly loved. I was the child of a special education teacher who was the first white teacher in an all-black elementary school in central Dallas, and a father who was going through medical school. And so service was part of my family's history. My family were also church people, and so I grew up with faith and in church. And then at a fairly young age, about 5 years old, we left all of that and went to a different state across the country, and I got a chance to start over. And my dad's medical career took us from place to place to place. And so I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived in the South, I've lived in the Southwest. I lived back in the Midwest, and I'm in Pennsylvania on the East Coast now. And so God's taken me on a geographic journey. I've been uprooted a lot of times. I know people who maybe grew up in the military would have a similar experience to some of the things that I lived through. And so I guess it prepared me for new experiences, different cultures, and seeing different perspectives, that there's more than one way to live life. So that's sort of Eric growing up in a nutshell. When I was 7 years old, I was at church and part of my Sunday school, and my pastor's wife was our Sunday school teacher. Her name was Barbara Hackman. She was a great Sunday school teacher, but she gave me a children's tract. And it was, if anybody remembers from the 70s, it was that glove with 5 fingers that talked about the path to salvation. And it was summertime, and I was looking for something to read. It was like a little comic book. And I read that, and it laid out the plan of salvation and who Jesus Christ was. And in the privacy of my, own room, nobody else around, I prayed a prayer of salvation. I asked Jesus
Wow.
to
I,
come
I,
into my heart. Even though I've walked a lot of paths and made a lot of mistakes, I've never doubted that commitment. It's been a blessing for everything I've lived through and all the work that I've done. First and foremost, to know that Jesus is my Savior.
and you said, Eric, that was at 5 years old?
7 years old.
7 years old.
7 years.
Still, that's amazing. So
It was an amazing experience.
I'm sitting there imagining you as a 7-year-old child, and the way that you describe it, like it wasn't this grand plan of I'm gonna give my life to Christ today. I just happened to to remember this thing that I was given. It looked exciting and interesting to me, and I
Mhm.
open it up, and the next thing you know, you are praying that prayer and surrendering your life to God. I wonder if even that Sunday school teacher, if she even remembers giving you that. But it to me, it's a reminder that sometimes little quote unquote little things can make a huge difference. I'm sure that she gave them to tons of children, and
I'm
maybe
sure.
not everybody ever used it, but it made a difference for you. And I think that's an important point to underscore for our audience is you never know. She was being obedient in that moment, gave you that track, and in the privacy of your own home and your own heart, you took that and you gave your life to Christ at 7, and you said, "Yeah, I get it. You're not perfect. That doesn't mean I made all the right decisions because I gave my life to Christ at 7 years old." But I would imagine that making a decision that early did make a difference in the trajectory of your life. So don't despise it. It reminds me of the scripture, don't despise the day of small beginnings. Like, you're just quote unquote just handing out something, right? But you just never know how many lives that will touch and the transformation that will take place.
I've been able to be in ministry for a very long time. But one of the things that I've always done, with that formative experience, is I've made sure that there's Bibles and Christian literature and devotionals and, that are available for anybody who comes in. And so I guess I hope one day I'm going to hear, and maybe that's my ending,
Yeah.
somebody
Someone
has got that experience.
Mhm. Yeah, and some of them you'll know, and some of them you may never know, but, there's a ripple effect that happens when we take those steps in obedience.
Oh, thanks for asking.
Yeah, so you mentioned that as a child, you moved around a lot. You were exposed to a lot of different experiences. Does anything stand out in your mind from when you were a child? Maybe even you talked about I think it was your mom or someone was the only white person in an all black area. I'm just curious some of the things that maybe stood out to you from these experiences as you were growing up.
Some of the things that stand out, obviously, even though I came from the deep South, um, my parents were embraced diversity and accepted other people. The other thing was that part of my heritage is Jewish, and I have family members who I knew in my lifetime who immigrated from Eastern Europe and experienced extreme persecution, and so, that kind of, helped me see God doesn't like haters. God embraces everybody and loves everybody. So, I think even though I lived in an environment where racism was prevalent, I learned from a very early age to embrace, people from different backgrounds. And, so I think that's one of the formative experiences for me. The one of the other things that I can remember just growing up is my dad um, is the kind of person that he walks down the street and he doesn't understand the concept. You don't look people in the eye, and so he got hit up by every panhandler he
I
ever
bet.
passed because he just treated them as people. And I always saw my dad helping other people. He'd stop and buy them lunch. He showed people courtesy. And it was an example, for me to follow that, you know, when I became an adult, I saw those that were in need as human beings as well. And I just followed my dad's example. And so I still buy people lunch, and I still, empty my wallet and hand it, to people in need. And I'm actually doing the work now of assisting people who are in, dire circumstances. But it comes from some of those early experiences of seeing a family who, cared about others.
So I'm curious, as you were growing up and you were witnessing these things, what was your initial thought on what you would be when you grew up? What were you going to do?
I had a series of jobs that I had my heart set on. For some reason, I wanted to be a poet for a while, and I don't have any talent in that direction. But that,
None
um,
still?
I don't think so. And then I wanted to be an architect, and I actually do design buildings as part of my work. And although I don't have any education in that, but I've done a lot of building projects and enjoy that. There was a time I wanted to be a physician, and then I spent a couple of summers volunteering in the hospital where my dad worked, and realized that was not the work that I wanted to do. But there was a point in time, I was a teen, that I went to summer camp, and there was a heavy focus on international missions. And I really, I rededicated my life, and I wanted to be a missionary. And I felt like I was called to foreign missionary service. And actually, when I graduated high school, I went to Bible college, and that was my intent. And then I went overseas on some short-term projects, and sort of got disillusioned with some of that, which is a whole other topic of conversation. But God called me back in my adult years to Christian ministry, and I had made a commitment to be a missionary, but God led me to domestic missions work, and being able to live out my faith with people from all different backgrounds here, in the United States. So I had some experiences in China and Africa and Mexico and the Caribbean, and so I did a lot of travel. But where God actually planted me to serve is right here in Central Pennsylvania.
That is so interesting how we have these plans and we think based on what we know that this is the best path, this is how I'm going to make an impact. And God even allowed you to experience what you desired, but there was a reason that you needed to take that passion, that desire to make a difference, and use it on domestic soil. I'm curious though, are there some things that you can reflect back on now, and we'll bring the audience up to speed on the work you're doing. But are there some things that you can reflect on that maybe you learned were while you were in missions abroad?
Well, I think one of the things I loved, and was just a love of different culture, and that just because this is how we live in the United States doesn't mean it's how everybody has to live. This attitude of American superiority. There's good people, all over the world, and I think getting in touch through my personal faith with the Great Commission, Jesus says we're to be disciple makers. And what I experienced, I think, through some of my international experience, and not to characterize all missionaries or efforts, but there's a lot of people that were doing stuff for other people that they should have been doing it for themselves. And I think, I was with a very good mission in Africa, and realized that something like 90% of the people that were serving there as international missionaries were support people that never interacted with, local people other than the people they hired to clean their houses for them. And I just said, I don't think that's what I'm called to be doing. But I got the experience of living in other cultures. I got the experience of getting to know people from different backgrounds and loving them. And then I discovered we have international people on our own soil, and I get the chance to work now. And I guess we'll talk more about the work, but with people from the Middle East and from Africa and from Eastern Europe and Asia. You want to love the foreigner. You can love the people living right next door to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, as I heard you describing it, it's like All that happened is your location changed, but a lot of the same work that you were doing, the different cultures that you encountered, you just now do them here in the States. And I would imagine that your experiences growing up as a child, as combined with that, creates a level of connection and empathy, perhaps, for people of various backgrounds that maybe someone that didn't have all of those experiences would have. So it still speaks to, the intentionality of how God does things, because you still are probably going to look at your work in a different way than someone that does not have that background and experience.
Very true.
So you take some time in international missions, you end up back in the States. What was the first job that you had? Is it as a part of New Hope Ministries that you're an executive director now, or were there some steps along the way before you got there?
There were definitely some steps. And I spent 13 years in a ministry that worked with troubled teens and families, and working with, some kids who had been through the worst circumstances you can imagine, and who were, really endangering their lives and others' lives. And it was an amazing experience. It was exhausting, but working in child welfare system, and I learned a whole lot about nonprofit management. I learned a whole lot about, you said empathy, caring for others, and developing programming. And along the way, I started as a recent college graduate, and 13 years later, I had a master's degree in social work and a wife and daughter, and and I'm like, all right, God, where are you calling me to be next? And that's how God led me to New Hope Ministries, where I've been for the last 18 years.
18 years. That's a long time. That means that something must be going right at New Hope Ministry. So, talk to us a little bit about the organization and its mission.
Sure. Well, New Hope Ministries is a Christian social service agency. It was founded 42 years ago in central Pennsylvania. And it was during a time of economic recession, early 1980s, that local churches, became concerned about the level of poverty and joblessness and economic hardship that their community was experiencing, and recognizing that there was a lack of helps in the community that would meet people's needs. And so, and one of the things that I've admired about the organization is it was a collaborative effort of churches from all different backgrounds. We had the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the Pentecostals, and I mean, you name it, but they said we can agree on two basic things. Number one, we're called to love God, and second, we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so they started a little food pantry in the basement of one of the churches. They hired a couple of case workers and asked them to, be open a few days a week and trying to help people. And it was very appreciated by the community. There was a big need for it. And they kind of developed a stable model of service. And the next community over, about 10 miles down the road, reached out and said, we have some of the same problems in our small rural community and no place that people can go for help. Would you consider opening a branch office for us? And that's repeated itself over those 40, plus years, that we now have 9 offices, and I'm working on developing office number 10. We now are the primary human service organization for a population area of close to 500,000 people.
Thank God for the obedience early on, because this impact that you guys have now been able to have through 9 and soon to be 10 all really was contingent upon someone saying yes early on, that I see this need and I'm willing to make the sacrifices, commit to this work, not knowing what it would eventually become. That is such a blessing.
I have enjoyed getting to know the founders. Some of them are still alive, and one in particular was a dear Christian woman. And her husband told me one time that he got so tired of hearing her complain about the problems that existed, that almost out of irritation one day he looked at her and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And that led to her going to her pastor in the local church and you know, and one thing led to another. It was bigger than one person. It was bigger than one church. But yeah, we impacted the lives of 25,000 people from over 9,000 families in the last year.
There's a lesson even in you sharing that story. Thank you for doing that, Eric. Is maybe if something is bothering you and it gets under your skin and you've been complaining about it, maybe you are a part of the solution. And it takes shifting from just being aware of the problem, being irritated by the problem, to taking practical steps to resolve the problem. And to your point, it's probably going to take more than one person. I think God-sized missions often take a team of people to pull them off, but it does take, one or two people to be willing to get things started. And so it sounds like God was using her husband to say, "Okay, I'm tired of hearing about this. You need to get busy." Yes, that is such a blessing. You said some of the founders are still alive. Have they talked with you or anyone on the team about some of the early days? I'm curious, what was it like from what you understand for them getting this ministry started?
They didn't know how little they had when they got started. We had our 40th anniversary a couple of years ago, and we reached out to every founding board member, steering committee member that was part of that, and we had a group of them come. And one, we celebrated them, but two, we got a chance to visit, and they shared how they never believed that that initial effort would grow into the organization that's here today. But they were also able to say, if we had had a big enough vision, this is what we would have, envisioned for this work. But they still could see their fingerprints on the organization. And I got to hear over and over from them, thank you for keeping true to our Christian identity and commitment, that we are still a Christ seeking, Christ honoring organization that, is still connected to the local church. You're doing the same types of things we did. You're just doing them, so much more, and for so many more people. But I think they started with a grant of $15,000, the first year, and they didn't know they were poor. They just thought, what a blessing that God's providing.
50,000 is amazing, right?
Yeah, great. God is good, and our annual budget this year is close to $6 million.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and I'm still struggling to make ends meet, just because of all the needs that exist. But yeah, they just, I think, looking back, and I've sat down and done interviews and, had conversation, it was, what are we supposed to do next? Should we expand? If God provides, then we're going to follow, his lead. And, I think it's remarkable how the organization grew. I've been proud of, the work that's been done since I've been a part of it, but boy, did I have a great foundation when I came 18 years ago. And I've been, I think I bring some good qualities, but it's a team. I've got hundreds of churches. I've got thousands of volunteers. I've got dozens of staff members. I've got amazing, amazing people that are part of this effort. And I definitely have a role to play, but it's not the Eric show. And I don't want it to be.
Yeah, it definitely takes a team. Let's give our viewing and listening audience context on why that team is so important. Can you walk us through like the daily life? Like, what is it like in one of the 9 centers? What does an average day look like?
Well, we're open 5 days a week. 9 o'clock, the doors open, 4 o'clock, they close. And then several nights a week, we're running food pantry, for folks that are working during the day and can't make it in. And, we're often open on Saturday mornings. I'm in a building within walking distance of my small town of Dillsburg. And my other locations, for the most part, are within walking distance of neighborhoods of need. And it's a place where people can come that looks like a small grocery store, where you can walk in, grab a shopping cart, walk around and get fresh bread and produce, and leave with good quality food. check in with a caseworker, hop on a computer and do an assistance application or resume build. And there are people throughout the building wearing blue shirts like I am, that are mostly volunteers, people from our local churches and community who have a few hours to give and want to be a part of a community of people that cares about others. And so the volunteers are answering phones and teaching classes and driving trucks and putting food on shelves and cooking meals. We've got a daily lunch program. And so we've got each of our facilities has a parking lot that's always full of cars. We've got a building that's always full of people. We've got, like I said, we've got the grocery area and the casework area and a warehouse area. And there's a classroom that's a part where we're teaching. We're maybe doing after school tutoring or doing summer school for our local high school students or teaching budget or nutrition classes. So there's always activity. And because we're part of the local community and connected to so many churches and organizations, it becomes a central meeting point for the community. So you could walk in the evening when we're not here, and there's a men's Bible study on one end, and there's a youth group using last night, one of the local youth groups was washing trucks in the parking lot, that needed a good scrubbing. And, so there's always people here. You never know who's going to be, in the building. And it's a wonderful atmosphere of how you want a community to relate to one another.
Hmm.
And
It,
there's
it
people
sounds like
walking in the door saying, inevitably, I'm homeless. I have no place to sleep tonight. I'm in my car. I just got beat up by my husband. I lost my job. I don't know where I'm going to turn. I'm sick and I don't, the, people walk in, on the worst days of their lives. There are tears, there is fear. You see people pacing in the parking lot, afraid to come in and admit to somebody else that they're struggling. And just asking for help is the first barrier to getting through stuff. And it's a three ring circus, and it just happens.
wow. I'm envisioning what you describe. It sounds like such a bustling place, yet and still, you guys have to be focused not just on what's happening today, but long term impact. You talked about earlier, I'm operating on this budget, but I really need more money because there's more people that need help because every day someone new, multiple people are walking in, as you said, which is really, really powerful on the worst day of their life. How do you balance, Eric, the short term, everyday things that are in your face with, okay, I've got to look out for the long term vision that we have, growing our budget so that we can continue to serve this community? How do you balance those two?
I used to not balance it well because there was just so much to do. And I realized that I needed a partner. And so I hired a program director and I said, I want you to manage the day to day. And I want you, and I'm going to focus on the systemic issues that face the organization, the funding issues. I'm going to focus on, and I've got a great fundraising team, but I need to be where decisions are being made that impact the community. And so I've been able to get more into advocacy. I sit on advisory boards, about, various issues like hunger and homelessness and, need for childcare. And so I get a chance to shape the conversation and put into, and again, we're a well-respected human service agency, so we're invited to a lot of tables where I get to hear about things. But I was talking just this week with my housing team and saying, I need you guys to manage the day-to-day crisis because I'm 2 years ahead, in the cycle. And I need to think, okay, how are we going to continue doing this work? The grant application I have that's due tomorrow, I won't see that money for a year from now, but it's due today. And so I've got to think about, and I've been wrestling, what's my budget going to be, next year? What's my staffing going to be next year? And then the next level is that strategic planning process is thinking 5 or, even 10 years in the future. And you can't anticipate everything. Just in my time, been through the 2008 recession. where we saw the number of people coming to us for anti-poverty services double in a 12-month period. And I've been through the pandemic where the world turned upside down. And we didn't have that one in our plan. And yet some of the other work that we had done to be a resilient organization positioned us to be able to respond to those needs.
I love the way you said that. Like, I need you guys to manage this day to day, because what you're ultimately saying, Eric, is if you cannot separate yourself, not that you don't care, and I think that's
I
important
do
to
care, but
illustrate
you're
you
right.
care, but if you don't do that, you're the only one that can be the long-term person and do the grant application. So if no one does that, then we're literally like sabotaging the long-term impact of the work. So there has to be a level of discipline. That's what I'm hearing. A level of discipline that you bring to your role to say, I do care. It would be really easy to get caught up into those day-to-day responsibilities, but for the good of the organization, I need to stay focused on these things. I'm curious, was there something that happened that made that light bulb come on to say, I need to hire a program manager so that I could do this? Do you remember what transpired?
I remember a recession in the early 2000s. It wasn't as bad as the one, we've experienced. And I know they're not calling it a recession, but I can tell you people on the street are hurting real bad right now. Where the organization I was working for at the time lost enrollment, and enrollment brought tuition or payment that allowed us to hire staff. And without adequate funding, the organization and its mission suffered terribly. It was, I remember at one point carrying multiple job descriptions because we didn't have the budget to fill, and feeling like somebody in the organization ought to have anticipated this and ought to be working on this, problem. And maybe they were, and I wasn't seeing it, but I think lack of planning had a direct influence on our day-to-day programming. And it was a good program and it was a good organization, but we were mightily thin, sometimes, probably in an unhealthy way. And we weren't able to care for and retain, the quality staff that we really needed in the organization. So I worked my way up through the trenches. I got to see examples of good leadership and bad leadership, and the impact that had on the mission of the organization. And so when I had the chance to become, the CEO, I realized again, other than following the Lord, which is important, I needed to secure the resource base of the organization because everything flowed from adequate resources.
You've touched on something here, Eric, that I think is really important for us to make sure that our audience doesn't miss this is there are impacts, adverse impacts, when we don't take the time to focus on the strategic planning and all of these pieces. We can easily think, well, these were the needs of the day. I had to take care of it, all of that. But eventually it creates these holes, right? Because you talked about having to carry several different job descriptions because there just wasn't a budget to do that, which meant that you probably weren't able to do any of those roles to the level of excellence that you really felt they deserved in your heart, but there just wasn't a budget to do it. That's a direct result of the lack of strategic planning. So ultimately, it ends up holding us back by not, thinking about the future. And it sounds like being able to see those, as you said, examples of those good experiences and not so good experience really informed you when you had the opportunity to make the decisions to say, I can't let that happen here because this work that we do is so important. I'm going to get some help and be able to delegate some of these things so that I can focus. You also mentioned a grant, a grant application that you were working through recently. I know that that is a topic that our audience is very, very interested in because, as you said, we need funding in order to further the work that God has called us to. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you identify grant opportunities and then some of the things that you think about in terms of positioning your organization for success?
Sure. I have taken some trainings on grant writing. And I would encourage people to read about the process of grant writing, to, take some seminars. But the one thing that none of the trainings have adequately covered, in my experience, has been, where do you find the people with the money? And I think the answer, whether you are doing fundraising from individuals or organizations or funders or government, is that these are just people, and people give money to people, and it's important to have relationships. And so a lot of my time is spent going out where these people are located, and I can walk into a room of human service or government or, uh, ministry officials, and I can guarantee you that there is money available in that room. And you don't go around the room with your hat out, but you get to know people. You know, and you say, what do you do, and what's important to you, and what problems are you experiencing? And it's almost inevitable anymore, and maybe it's partly my reputation or the reputation of the organization, that I leave with a stack of business cards of people who say, we need to talk. I like what I'm hearing from you. Let's talk some more about that. I left a meeting this week with, here are 5, 6, multiple grant opportunities, knowing what's important to them, and when they want to hear from me. I was with a funder recently. I think it was a county official, for one of our public grant programs. But I said, can we come down and have a conversation with you? I want to tell you our ideas. I want to hear what's important to you. I want to learn more about this funding process. And she said, do you know you're the only recipient who made an appointment to come down and talk with us? I don't know why more people won't come and talk, because there's wisdom that we can give them. Do you know that there's a rubric that they score grant applications for? Whether it's explicit or, implicit,
Still there.
there are criteria. And if you don't talk about them, that's rarely on their website. That's rarely in the application document. Sometimes it is. I love that transparency and openness, but they will tell you, make sure you put these words in. Those are the things that are going to give your application extra points. The other thing is to ask, what is a typical gift from your foundation? I went with one of my fundraisers one time who was new to my organization, and she said, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite funders. And I simply asked that question the first time I met. What would you consider to be a typical gift, and what would be a generous gift? And and he said, our typically we would give, 15 to $20,000, but we've been known to do $50,000 for this foundation. And she looked at him with her jaw open, and she said, I didn't know that. Why? He never gave me that kind of money. And he said,
She
you
felt
never
cheated.
asked.
You
Right?
never asked.
You
Yep.
never ask, and so it's almost, inevitable. What do you give to? How much, could we get? If you have the capacity to give a $500,000 gift, and I'm asking you for $5,000, I'm not, taking advantage of that. And if the opposite is true, and I don't want to despise $5,000 gifts, they're wonderful. But to come to you with, I was just working on a grant before the call. I'm looking for $70,000 for a pickup truck. I think it's going to be a stretch, but we got 50,000 from this foundation last year. I know that they, have the ability to give me a good chunk of that, of that ask. But it's knowing your funder, and then the other part is research. Do you know that every charitable funder has all of the gifts that they've made online as part of their tax document? It's public information. You can access it through guidestar.com, and you can see who they've given to and how much they've given, and if you want, match who you are and what you do against other organizations, and put in a similar request. So those are some of the secrets of success. The other side is just, having exemplary ideas and writing. I think those are a given. knowing what you're trying to do, what it's going to cost, and then being able to deliver results. Because if you give a gift, or if they give you a gift today and you don't produce results, good luck getting a gift in the future. But if you deliver great results and report back, again, that communication is key. You set yourself up for a long-term relationship, with a funder. And if you do well with little, the potential grows over time.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've had a lot of conversations with major donors, and that's the consistent thing. It's almost like the first gift is a test. Let's see how you're going to perform with this gift that we are giving you. I want to see results, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second, Eric. And if you give me results, yeah, I'm happy to increase the amount. But if I don't see the results that I was expecting, then it helps inform what I support going forward. And that probably means it's not going to be your organization. So and that kind of ties back, as I think about it, Eric, to the strategic planning part of it, because you can put in a great application and someone might support you one time, but if you're not thinking ahead, if you're not really walking the things out that you need to as a leader in your organization, then eventually that the funds that you need will dry up, because people will, unfortunately, the reputation becomes one of not producing results versus having all of these success stories to point to. So I want to talk about, from your perspective, how do you see impact reporting? What does that look like for the different organizations that have supported?
This is an issue that we're working through with our board right now. We just had a meeting of some of my board members talking about programs today, and we're reviewing our results from the past year. And one of the things that you can report on is outputs. We did this activity this many times for this many people. Um, but we're asking questions and we're getting ready through our current strategic planning process to take a sharp look at all of our programs. But I like thinking in terms of short-term goals, medium and long-term goals. And if you're doing anti-poverty work like we are, my ultimate goals for people is for them to increase stability, whatever that looks like for them. And I like stability better than I like self-sufficiency, because not everybody has the capacity to be, truly self-sufficient. But if they can be more stable, if you can identify supports and resources and behaviors that are going to make them more successful over time. So being able, for us, it's very individual. Let's come up with a plan. What do you want to work on? What would, it's kind of asking the miracle question. How would you know, if your life was different? So I'd really like to be able to move into a better place. I'd really like to get out of my car and into a place. Um, I, I'd like to have a job, that meets my monthly budget. I'd like to have health care and get my teeth fixed. I mean, people can have things that are important to them. And you could say, where can we start and how can we help you? And that's where you bring the programs that you have. It's not a cookie cutter program. It's, that you're not ready to work on that. Okay. How about, if you're not ready to start the job search process, how about we get you to attend a budget class and start thinking about how do you use the resources that you have today? That's a short term or a medium term objective, and little steps make big progress over time. We have been serving for decades, and we have been serving some of the same families for decades and for generations. And so I figure movement is movement. If we can get people moving in the right direction, if we can get them, we're getting ready to have a GED class graduation, and we've got 8 people who got their high school equivalent. You say, well, 8's not a lot. Hey, but it's a lot for them. And I know for those people that they've spent maybe years working on those skills and tests and, getting to the point of finishing, that their confidence has changed in what they can accomplish. How do you measure that through, an impact score? That's because that's so individual. So sometimes it's anecdotal stories. I can tell you about Barb. and how her family didn't believe in her. And by getting her GED, it gave her the confidence to go to do a community, college training program. And the excitement. And she says, "You guys were there for me when my own family didn't care if I lived or died." Those are, so sometimes you have to tell it through a story. Sometimes you do it through a pretty picture. We're big social media people, and we're just capturing, so if you go on our Facebook, you'll see the car wash, and you'll see somebody dressed in a corn costume, for Hunger Action Month. And you'll see, so it's getting the message out of what's important to you, what you do. And then, when people come to you for help, asking what's important to them and trying to deliver the best service you can, knowing that you've got inadequate resources to meet every person's need. And you just have to, it's like fishes and loaves every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's real life for you. Every single day, God helps you to be able to provide for as many people as possible. And I would imagine in some ways the recognition that the numbers just continue to grow. Like you talked about, I think during the pandemic, it was like double. It also provides motivation, right? To not allow yourself to get stagnant or think, okay, well, we got a good thing going here. And we do, but the need continues to grow. So we as a team have to continue to grow. We have to continue to cast a bigger vision for the people that do have the wherewithal to support us so that to your point, so that they get it. So that as the need grows, we are in position to be able to help more people. So there's so much wisdom that you've shared with us, Eric. I want to respect your time, though. For the leader that is watching us, that's listening to us, and thinking, "Wow, I've got work to do," because you've made this case that I have to make sure that I can give these funders confidence in me and my organization, that their money that they invest with us, because that's ultimately what it is going to get a return, not a financial return, but that they're going to see that lives have been transformed. So maybe there's someone watching us that's listening to us right now, and they're being honest with themselves. I'm probably not doing a good job of painting that picture and telling that story. What is a piece of advice that you would give them to get started? What is something that they can do to help those that would be interested in supporting them kind of, realize that they are committed to the work that they're doing?
I think I would encourage people to take a honest look at what they do. And do you honestly take pride in your work? Are you doing it well? Are you being efficient? Are you learning and growing as a person, as a leader, as an organization? Or are you just phoning it in? And I unfortunately I see a lot of nonprofits who they do the bare minimum. And maybe it comes from exhaustion. Maybe it comes from, they just feel defeated. And so they're just going to, do what they did, last year and hope for the best. I think this work is important. And I've got a passion for the people that my organization serves. And I think they deserve our best. I work really, really hard, and I know my team members do too. But if I'm going to work this hard and feel this tired at the end of the day, I want to feel like I'm contributing to something that's actually making a difference. I want to see lives that are being changed. And ultimately, I think maybe the spiritual perspective of who I'm working for, and trying to be true to those values and trusting in God. There's a lot of faith involved of, I don't know how we're going to do this, and I'm not going to bet the farm, but I am going to step out in faith and say, Lord, if you want us to pursue excellence, you're going to have to come through. And so it's like Gideon. You put your fleece out and you say, Lord, are you leading? And if the fleece comes back wet or dry, you know that God's going to provide. I did a building one time, and we had just bought and built a building during the 2008 recession, which you would think is not the right time to be doing a capital project. And yet real estate prices were really good, and there was funding that we were able to secure, but we're barely recovered. And I learned about a building opportunity for one of my locations. And I went to my board and I said, I think we should buy a building. And they said, you're nuts.
You're crazy, Eric.
Yeah, and I am. I acknowledge that. But I said to them, I said, would you give me some time just to go put our fleece out? And we needed $1.2 million to do that project. Within 3 weeks, I had verbal commitments for that money. And I came back and I said, guys, guess what? And they said, I guess we're buying a
You're
building.
getting the building.
Yeah. There was no risk for asking the question, but it was the right time. There was a need. There were people who believed in the work of our organization, and they said, you can put us down for $500,000. You can put us down for $250,000. You can count on us for, and it was just, I've never had it that clear, before or since, but that was the amazing experience of, what do I have to lose? And I think if you approach that, fundraising and programming, but it starts with a vision, whether it's a program or a project, or, you just say, I can imagine what it would look like if we could do this at the very highest level. And let's just find out if there are people who see it the same way we do, as opposed to, I'm going to plan for mediocrity and be, satisfied with mediocre results. It's not how I operate. Not everything turns to gold that I touch. Don't get me wrong, but that now's not the right time, or God is moving, and it's, this is what we're meant to do.
Yeah, I love that. We could talk about that all day. Operating in excellence really matters. And I would imagine that was a part of the equation for the donors that helped make that project possible. They could put their money in the pot because they had confidence in you guys because of how you have operated in excellence. So much wisdom there. Let's tackle one last piece, Eric, before I let you go. You've been doing this a long time. You've been on an amazing journey with God. You've seen miracles happen. I consider that capital campaign, 3 weeks, $1 million. That's a miracle. You've seen miracles happen. When all is said and done for you, how do you want your work, your life to be remembered?
I have this fear that I've got big shoulders, that the success of the organization has been resting on my shoulders, and that when I step away, it collapses. I don't think that's going to be the case, because what I try to do both in my organization and outside is to develop leadership and talent. I hope that the people who are coming up through my organization are either going to be prepared to move into leadership, or they're going to go out and start their own nonprofit organizations. And I've seen that happen, that people who used to work for me or people that I mentored are leading organizations that in some cases are doing really cool, things that I couldn't have thought of. It's never about me, but what I've received, I'm willing to give, to others. And I hope somebody remembers that I was part of their journey, along the way.
Well, Eric, I want to thank you for being a part of our journey here on the Beacon Show. You may never know the lives that you've touched through this interview, but I know that so many leaders are going to be encouraged and inspired and also challenged to step up their game and make sure that they're operating in excellence. If you're going to work hard, to your point, let's do it in such a way that truly makes a difference. So on behalf of our audience here at the Beacon Show, Eric, I want to thank you for your time, for your wisdom that you've shared with us. And we will be praying with you and for the team as you move forward, that God will continue to open doors and make ways for the work that you do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I enjoyed our time.